I mean, hello. Welcome. You made it through the summer? Well, you're here. Who didn't make it through the summer? If you could just raise your hands, that would be that would be very helpful. Welcome to the Tempe History Society, the inaugural lunch talk for our 24-25 season, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And before I do anything else, and I don't mean to lower the level, but this is 9/11, so it's a very important day that we all keep in mind what happened and make sure that future generations know so that something like this will never occur again. So if we can just have a moment of silence in memory of all the lives that were lost in New York at the World Trade Center on that day, that'll help keep the memory alive. Thank you very much. I hate to start out a new season on that note, but this really is an important day. So, welcome to our new season of Lunch Talks. Every season we start out, we think, my goodness, this is the best series that we've ever had. And I don't want to demean any of the lunch talks that took place last season or the season before. But we've really done a great job of building. And for those of you who might not know, all of our lunch talks are recorded and archived. They're streamed live on Facebook for those who are not able to make it, but then they're archived and you can go back and watch them again. So we're building up a tremendous library of Tempe history. And I think that's a really important contribution. I wish that we were able to have done that many years ago. So the Lunch Talk series is sponsored by Friendship Village, as you may know. Normally, Mark Young, who is the director of marketing and sales, is here, but unfortunately, he's not able to make it today. But it's because of our partnership with Friendship Village that we're able to accomplish much of what we're doing. How many are from Friendship Village today? Wow, great. Oh, the other question too, how many are members of the Tempe History Society? And those of you who are not, I would admonish you to leave the room immediately. I have to be careful how I say this because someone else is saying it in political ads, and I don't mean it in that way. But then you go to the front counter and become a member, which is really important. It is not expensive, $25, but it really helps the society when we're out looking for grants and other fundraising opportunities, because the first question that's asked is, how many members do you have? And we want to say 18,000. We're a little bit short of that, so if you want to join, we would welcome that. And I hope one day when I ask that question, everybody will raise both hands. It's double dipping, but that's all right. We don't mind counting you twice. All right, before we start, because Mark, who usually gives an introduction from Friendship Village, as I say, is not able to make it today, but I thought if you haven't seen it, they have created a very innovative commercial. I'd love to know how Friendship Village feels about it, but nonetheless, it's been broadcast many times. So I'd like to share with you the new Friendship Village commercial.
Welcome to Friendship Village. Let me show you around. Wow. It's like a cruise ship on land. Do you like art? Music? Heated pool? Yoga? Pickleball? There are events and group parties for just about every interest. There's so much to do here. Move it or lose it. Well, this is our stop.
Let's keep going.
That's it. Are the Friendship Village folks happy with that? Does that represent it? It's fun. It's fun. So that's the commercial you made. I think it even runs on Channel 8. So you'll see it often on television. And of course, Friendship Village is one of the oldest communities of its kind in Arizona, over 50 years old. Is that right? Yeah, near 50 years old. Who's 43 is hard to say, so it's near 50 years old. 43, all right. So on to the business of today, and I am actually very interested and excited about this presentation, which I will explain afterwards when I develop an opinion on the quality of it. You'll understand that later. But this is a great way, I think, to start. And it's probably a discussion of something that you don't know or very few people are aware of, but is so significant to the history of Arizona and to the Valley. And to that end, we've invited Anita Huizar Hernandez. Did I do okay? I don't have the, hable español, sai. That's the best I can do in Spanish, so. Hable español, sai. That's close, isn't it? All right. So Anita, if you don't mind if I call you that, is connected to ASU. She's an associate director of the Hispanic Research Center and associate professor in the School of International Letters and Cultures at Arizona State University. And she's only 18. I don't know how that all discovered. You'll see she's very young to have all of those accomplishments. But her research focuses on the roots of Latino religious, political, and cultural expression, and she'll explain all of that. She has written a number of essays for various scholarly journals and publications, but is also the author of Forging Arizona, A History of the Peralta Land Grant and Racial Identity in the West, published in 2019. So that really is the subject of her talk today. So without further ado, because we wouldn't invite anybody here who doesn't have the right credentials, and we could spend an hour going down all of the other things that she's done. Please welcome Anita.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to begin by thanking especially Dr. Christine Marin, who was the one who invited me to give this talk, and also who is the reason that I and so many other scholars of my generation are drawn to the archives. We are so grateful for your work in founding the Chicano Research Collection, which makes possible real archives, which I won't be talking about today. Today I'm talking about fake archives. But that interest in archives and documenting collective history has really been transformative for the field. So thank you very much, Chris, for everything that you've done. Thank you to the Tempe History Society. Yes. Thank you to the Tempe History Society, which I will be becoming a member of shortly at the desk after this, now that I am aware of it, and it's extremely reasonable membership fees. I wanted to start this talk by also acknowledging that land is a key term in this talk and is a key focus in my work. So I think a lot about who has inhabited this space, past, present, and who will inhabit it in the future. I live and work on Akimaloatam and Peeposh lands, and I am very committed to thinking about how really interrogating the difficult past sometimes helps us build a more productive shared future together. And speaking of that past, I am also very honored to be here because I was raised in Tempe, and I am a product of Tempe. I have beautiful memories of the History Museum as a child and the topographical display, if anyone remembers that, with the Salt River, and seeing it in the dark room and how magical it was for me to think about what happened here before I came here. And so it's really exciting. I think that I would have never expected that I'd be talking to you here now. So that's great. And what am I talking about? I am talking about my first book, Forging Arizona, A History of the Peralta Land Grant and Racial Identity in the West. How many of you have heard of the Peralta Land Grant before? I kind of thought that was going to be the case because you're at a history talk. So I thought this is not going to be a normal audience who generally haven't heard about this particular chapter of Arizona history, but to get everyone up to speed really quickly. James Addison Reavis was a con artist in the late 19th century who came up with a plan. He found out about the US-Mexico War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended that war. And as part of that treaty, and we'll go into this historical context in even more detail, he found out that if you had a Spanish or Mexican land grant, you could get that grant, theoretically, recognized, and you could claim that land. And he thought, I have a great idea. All I need to do is make up a land grant, travel all around the world, and forge all of these archives to prove that this land grant existed, and then create a 100-year-long chain of inheritance connecting myself to that land grant, ending with one person, and I will marry that person. And that is how I will create this 20-year con. An incredible story, totally outlandish, but my favorite part of this story is that he was nearly successful. Astounding. And for me, as someone who, I should tell you right off the bat, I'm not a historian. So if you're here for the nitty-gritty historical details, I will give you as many as I can, but I'm a cultural critic, and I am really interested in what this case shows us about what we want to know about the past and how we remember the past, even more than what actually happened. So the structure for the talk today is I will first start with a little bit of brief historical context of what made this scheme even possible, what were the historical events that Reavis was exploiting to create this scheme, then what was his two-pronged plan, which depended on first inventing a land grant and then a chain of inheritance that he would connect himself to, culminating in a trial in the late 19th century, in the 1890s, thinking about the trial transcript, and then, because I am a literary critic by training, the reactions and remembrances that happened in literature and film and newspapers, and then finally, the Peralta Land Grant today and how it is remembered, or more often than not, not remembered, and what the stakes are for our lack of remembering this particular historical event. All right, historical context. This is a quote from Article 9 of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is the treaty that ended the war between the United States and Mexico. So in this article, it says, the Mexicans shall be maintained and protected in the free enjoyment of their liberty and property. And you can see here, it's a bit difficult to see maybe, but the dramatic difference in these two maps, the one above, before the US-Mexico War, in which Mexico had nearly 50% more territory, and after the US-Mexico War. So not only did the US get all of this territory all of a sudden, also there were people living there, and there were claims to land. And those people were made certain promises that not only would they be maintained in their liberty, but also their property. So this was the promise. Now, in practice, very few people were able to maintain their claims to property, and that's another story for another time, and there's lots of wonderful scholarly work on that. But needless to say, it's easy to let a claim languish in court and wait people out in that kind of legal battle. So a lot of people were not able to maintain their lands. But James Addison Reavis found out about this and thought, I have a great idea. I'll just make one of these up, and then I can claim a bunch of property under this historic treaty. This is a very simplified map of the Peralta Land Grant. If you know anything about Spanish and Mexican land grants, you immediately know this is a fake for two reasons. One, it is enormous. Spanish and Mexican land grants would not hardly ever be this size. And the even more obvious giveaway is it is a perfect rectangle, which makes no sense. Spanish and Mexican land grants were not perfect rectangles. They followed, generally, the natural environment. mountains, rivers. This is a very different cultural way to think about land. And so you would know there's no way. In fact, I did a lot of the research for this book when I was a fellow at the Center for Regional Studies in New Mexico. And as soon as I showed this map in New Mexico, people would start to laugh. Because there were many more Spanish and Mexican land grants in New Mexico. There's a different history with Spanish and Mexican land grants there as compared to here. And they knew that it was a fake. But what's incredible is that Reavis was able to make a very large sum of money selling quitclaim deeds to the Southern Pacific Railroad, to mining companies, and to individual homesteaders based on his scheme that you would know immediately if you had any kind of understanding of this past was fake, which speaks to the lack of understanding and the total erasure of this history that happened before 1848. And that's a very different story that happened in Arizona versus New Mexico. In New Mexico, there was a different kind of cultural remembering of the Spanish and Mexican past, partially for demographic reasons. There were a lot more people there of that heritage than there were in Arizona. But in Arizona, Reavis was able to capitalize on that broad ignorance to make money. This is going to be very hard to see, but I wanted to give you this more detailed map because in the very corner, you can see us. We're there under Phoenix and Tempe in the upper left. This could be the James Addison Reavis History Center if a few key people were not involved in a very prominent trial in the 1890s. We just narrowly missed that. So the fun thing about when you're going to make up a land grant is you can just put it anywhere. And so why not put it somewhere where the railroads are interested in? Why not put it somewhere with a bunch of different mining opportunities? So that's what Reavis did, is he put it in the middle of the state, roughly the central part of the state. So what did he do? How did he nearly accomplish this incredible con? So Reavis was a talented forger. He found out that he was a great forger because he was fighting on the Confederate side in the US Civil War, kind of taking the temperature, figuring out that things weren't going to go their way, forged his commanding officer's signature and crossed to the north right before a key battle. And that experience was really key for him to understand that forging documents could be powerful. And so he took that knowledge and he then applied it to this 20-year con, forging archives in Spain, in Mexico, and in the United States. So he had a few different kinds of techniques that he would use. One of them is he would use this chemical compound to erase certain parts of certain documents, and then he would write over them. That's what's happening here in this document, which is supposedly a proclamation to citizens of Guadalajara. It's altered to show that the Baron of Arizona, who's not a real person, had been appointed a royal inspector. So the way that Spanish and Mexican land grants worked is you had to do something for the Spanish crown or for the Mexican government to be able to be granted land, right? So first he needed to have an ancestor who did something good for the crown, and then the crown would grant you this land. So that's what's happening here. Sometimes he would also just entirely forge a page and then glue it into a document. This is why if you've ever been to an archive, there are people watching you vigilantly, because archival documents are only, that material is only good as we can trust it, right? So that was another thing that he did. He also would take things from archives, so he stole this seal and then attached it to forged documents that he then filed with the US Surveyor General in Tucson. So he had all of these different kinds of tricks that he would use depending on where he was, what was available to him, to create this body of forged evidence. But it wasn't enough to just invent this one episode, supposedly in the mid-1700s, by which the first Baron of Arizona was granted this land. He also needed to forge an entire family tree to cover between the mid-1700s and 1870 when he started the scheme, and eventually 1895 when it went to trial in Santa Fe. So he had all kinds of forged images of various members of the family. Sometimes he would commission people to paint these. Sometimes he just found things that looked old and looked like they could be Spanish. and then had this very, very complicated family tree leading to him. But the problem, of course, someone like James Addison Reavis, an ex-Confederate soldier from Missouri, not a very convincing descendant of this forged family tree, right? And I'm glossing a first attempt that maybe Vic talks about in his talk about the Baron. That's less interesting to me because it doesn't have my favorite person in this historical thing. But this is the claim that went farther. He needed to find an heir, and more specifically, an heiress. This is the most interesting and also for me the most tragic part of this entire saga. All of these plans led to this one woman, Sofia Peralta Reavis. And in this image, you see the confluence of the two streams of Reavis's plan. Supposedly markings of the limits of this land grant on this rock, and more importantly, this image of Sofia Peralta Reavis. This was a woman that he found in California of uncertain parentage, an orphan, who he convinced, questionably, I mean, there's very little archival evidence that we have of what she actually thought, that he convinced was the heiress to this, and then he, of course, married her. There's, not surprisingly, an enormous age difference between the two of them and lots of other kinds of power hierarchies that are at play here. But Sofia Peralta Reavis was the person through which Reavis connected himself to this fake claim. All of this culminates in a trial, Peralta Reavis versus the United States. This is the forged will of the first Baron, which was inserted by Reavis into the records of the mission San Javier del Bac. If you've been to Tucson, this is the white dove of the desert, so it's just a little bit south of Tucson. So it was actually pretty easy for the US government to disprove the first part of Reavis's scheme, which was all of these archival maneuvers that he did. Once they got people who actually were experts in Spanish and Mexican history, it became immediately clear that Reavis was very sloppy and didn't really understand the nuances of their record-keeping system. For example, he didn't know there was a table of contents in a separate book than this book of the forged will of the first Baron. He wasn't familiar with something that every student of Spanish colonialism knows, which is that they took copious notes and they kept two copies, one in the New World, new to them, and one in the Old World, right? So there are all of these different errors. He used a steel pen, which wouldn't have been invented in the mid-1700s. He used the wrong shape of an S that wouldn't have been typical of the Spanish crown during this time period. My favorite as a professor of Spanish, he had errors in the subjunctive that are totally classic of a second language learner. Anyone who has been in Spanish class and fumbled through those verb tenses can relate to those kinds of errors and others. So that kind of documentation, once they actually got people who knew anything that they were talking about, was simple. What was hard was Sofia. The trial transcript is over 1,000 pages long, and in it, government lawyers and and of course, I feel like it goes without saying that he represented himself at this trial. Like, you can see that one coming a mile away. But all of these trials going back and forth about this document and the S and the subjunctive and whatever leads to, what about Sofia Peralta Reavis? What do we do with this woman of color and this documentation we have? What do we do with this lack of information about this person? So they start talking to character witnesses, asking all kinds of questions, and finally she takes the stand in by far the most dramatic part of the trial. She takes the stand, and through a back and forth with the government attorney, it becomes clear that she doesn't know how to read, which makes a lot of sense as he's asking her, why didn't you look over these documents? She bursts into tears. They have to pause the trial. They reconvene, and the government attorney asks her point blank, essentially, don't you know you're faking? And she says this, and these are her last and nearly only recorded words that we have in the archival record. No, sir, I did not know I was personating anybody but myself. Which is an incredibly powerful statement and brings up a lot of things that I think about in my work. I would love to know more about Sofia Peralta Reavis. I wish I knew Was she in on the con? Was she not in the con? But that kind of information is not accessible to us so many times as researchers, especially researchers who are interested in marginalized communities whose interior thoughts were not of interest to people creating archives at the time. But what we do have is this statement that really inverts the hierarchies that are functioning at the time in this court of private land claims. And at least for this moment, she says, I am this person, I own this land, I have this power. And that's all we can really say about her. It's a really incredible moment. This was big news at the time, even though now the Peralta Land Grant is not very well remembered with the exception of this room of historians who all know about the Peralta Land Grant in general. Most people have not heard of this particular case. There used to be a steakhouse in Tucson that was themed around the Peralta Land Grant. Has anyone been there? The museum is at, or the menu is at the Arizona Historical Society in Tucson, and you can get different cuts of steak, like the Peralta cut, the Sophia's, the filet. It's very fun. So it used to be part of this kind of lore, but at the time, it was huge news, huge news. This particular article was reprinted nationally. It was covered in England. The case was so important that candidates for territorial governor were asked to go on the record about what they thought about this particular case. And so here you have very much language from the time. Cap sheaf of fraud. Scheme of James Addison Reavis staggers fiction. Most astounding swindle ever attempted. The hero was a streetcar conductor, and his wife played the role of heiress. So you are already getting a sense of how this particular story is being finessed into the press. And you have to remember, okay, it's 1895, we're talking about peak yellow journalism, sensationalized reporting. So this is a great case for that kind of thing. And people are actually very closely following this particular case. With time, in particular in regard to Sophia Peralta Reavis, the way that her story is told becomes, what I argue in the book, is a sort of bellwether for ideas about the time about race and gender. So here we have 100 years later, in 1947, an article in the Saturday Evening Post. Her name has been changed to Carmelita. This is a shift that happened in some sort of reactions and remembrances. And here you have very offensive language, the illiterate kitchen drudge who fully believed Reavis' story that she was descended from Spanish kings, heiress to titles and vast wealth. So here you start to see this shift. She's pictured here wearing a lace mantilla, which would be associated with Spanish clothing, and that was true. Reavis did dress her up in like cosplaying, essentially, as if she were a Spanish baroness. But you start to get this vilification of Sophia Peralta Reavis in addition to James Addison Reavis, who was the actual con man in this story because of the way I argue in the book that she was transgressing these boundaries of race and gender and class at the time. And lots of weird things happen with the way that Sophia Peralta Reavis gets remembered and retold in these reactions and remembrances. One of them, I should have mentioned that the author of the Saturday Evening Post article, Callan, anyone read the novel Arizona, which then became a blockbuster movie in the 1940s, and that's what Old Tucson Studios was built for. So he was a well-known Western interest author at the time. William Atherton Dupuy also wrote a novel, Baron of the Colorados, that was loosely based on this history of the Baron of Arizona. What's interesting to me about this novel is he reimagines Sophia Peralta Reavis yet again, this time as a distant relative descendant of Cochise. So here you have that she's just sort of this floating signifier who gets mapped on to any kind of anxiety that people have at the time or romanticization of a past that they would like to portray as distant. Yet again, in the 1950 film, The Baron of Arizona, here you have a promotional poster and a great quote. Women fought for his kisses, men clamored for his life. And Vincent Price, you might be recognizing here in these images, plays Baron of Arizona, which is really fun because he's so much taller than the rest of the cast. It's such a terrible B-movie. these two, like Spanish police officers have heavy Bronx kind of accents. It's just very low budget, very ridiculous, becomes this classic romance. Interestingly for me, Sofia Peralta Reavis is played by Ellen Drew, who was a Hollywood starlet at the time, very well known for her girl next door looks, very particular kind of girl next to a particular door. And so here we have yet again this malleability with regard to Sofia Peralta Reavis and who she is and what she represents for this particular case. And one of the most important parts for me of the trial transcript is that they clearly say this is a fraud, but they refuse the court to rule on Sofia Peralta Reavis' identity. In fact, the Chief Justice goes so far as to say, I think she's Spanish, but that's beyond the purview of what we need to determine here. And so what I look at from my perspective today as a cultural critic who's very interested in these slippery relationships between race and gender and class and place is how were they trying to determine her identity at the time? Did she speak Spanish? What were her hobbies? There were all of these interest pieces that Reavis planted, like, oh, she's painting in her sala. You know, like just how would a lady of this particular parentage act at this particular time? Versus later on, okay, well, now what are our expectations of this? And what becomes even too dangerous for us to remember about this woman who did declare in this court that she owned this land? Which gets us to the Peralta Land Grant, or lack thereof, today. So this is a really fun quote from the Santa Fe Weekly Mexican and Livestock Journal from 1894. Whatever the decision of the court may be, the name Peralta will be a familiar one in the Southwest for generations to come. Some generations, but not so much anymore. And so one way to read this story, this history, this event in our collective past is as kind of a fun bit of trivia. In fact, if anyone has Arizona Trivial Pursuit like I do, it is one of the cards. So now when you're playing against your friends, you can correctly answer that question. But another way is to read it as what are the aspects of this story that make it very difficult to remember in terms of what cultural ignorance allows for. And I think this is especially interesting because in terms of the technology that Reavis was using, this is a very kind of analog approach to misinformation. But of course, now we're talking a lot about augmented intelligence and what does that mean, and misinformation, and what about fakes, and what about fabrications. But what a lot of scholars working in that area are saying right now is it's essentially holding up a mirror to society of the things that we value, the things that we want to remember, the things that we don't want to remember. And what Reavis was doing is a warning for us, right, of lacking context and not being able to identify that kind of misinformation. So for me, that is a really valuable part of the story for us today as we face new technologies and new ways to question the past and also the future. Thank you.
All right. Ooh, that's really well. I just put it down here.
Do you want me to stay here? Okay.
Yes, because I'm sure there are some questions, and I have a few. One, Sophia is very critical to the whole history of this story of James Addison Reavis. Can you talk a little bit about her background, how he discovered her?
Yes, I talk about what he says. And what he says, which is really outlandish, which I talk about in the book, is that he met her on a train. And then by looking at her, he guessed that she must be the heiress to this very particular Spanish land grant. And in the chapter where I look at that part of the trial transcript, I think a lot about the way that he's planting these like racialized and gendered markers to make it seem like she must be the Spanish heiress, which of course, not just in the trial transcript, but in the depositions of the many character witnesses, you see people poking holes in what he was saying. And This actually has a long precedent in terms of the purity of blood doctrine that the Spanish crown would have used. So the way that people determined, the way that the government, the Spanish crown determined purity of blood was very similar, right? They would have all of these character witnesses, and they would interview people, and they would ask these kinds of questions, and a lot of people have talked about, scholars have talked about the way that differences in religion on the Iberian Peninsula then got mapped onto the way that we think about race in the Americas, and this is a really clear instance of dialogue between that process, which was also very archival, also very interview-based, and a more 19th century revitalization of that, and arguably we still, some people still do these things today, right? And like your news feeds might even be full of people who question each other's identities more recently. So this is not something that has stopped with Peralta.
Unfortunately, she's not always characterized in that way, but I think it's safe to say that she was a victim.
Very much so, yes. But I didn't want to just talk about her in that way in the book. I also wanted to talk about her agency, however circumscribed it may be, which is why I think that quote of hers really resonated with me. She was, in her own way, carving her own space in this story.
And it was a long-term relationship before all of this became public. Something else that comes up a lot, particularly in this area, Peralta is a really common name, and it gets associated with a lot of things. What about all the people that talk about a Peralta Land Grant or Peralta whatever in the Superstition Mountains?
Yeah, so some people will say that maybe if you all have been to the Superstition Mountains, looking for the Peralta mine, the Lost Dutchman mine, and all that is connected to this story. I mean, it's connected in the way that all sort of mythology in the West is connected. There was a group of actual Peraltas who actually signed on to Reavis's case when they found out about it, and they, I won't be using the correct legal terminology, but they put forward a brief or something before it became clear that it was a forgery, saying, oh, well, he has this claim, we, the Peraltas of Arizona, also have this claim. And then as it became very clear that it was a forgery, just sort of backed away, like oh, never mind. We're actually not part of that thing that he's doing.
And as I understand, there's a Reavis associated with superstitions. Can you, any relationship?
Everything that I found, I wouldn't speak authoritatively on because it's more, well, this whole case is fact or fiction versus, for me as a literary critic, I would say, what are the stories that inform our experience?
And Reavis, well, not an everyday name, but it is fairly common. There was a judge, I believe in Yuma, that was named Reavis, and not related to James Addison. Anyone have any questions about this? Oh, no, we need to, because it's streaming, we need to get it on the mic. Yes, who was that? Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation, but I'm still curious about Sophia. Was her last name Peralta?
So because she was an orphan, her last name wouldn't have been the last name that she was associated with. So no, she was not raised with the last name Peralta. But what her actual last name was, I mean, if you follow the character witnesses, she was raised, or she was supposedly the child of an Anglo trader who was actually also from Missouri, weirdly enough. And then supposedly a Native American woman. And so that's how you see a lot of this very offensive language in the press. It becomes obvious the forgery about her being a half-breed and that sort of thing. But that's how Reavis is able to say, oh, she's actually a long-lost Peralta. That's very much a Cinderella kind of story. She was even supposed to have a twin, and the twin died during childbirth, and the mother was supposed to have died. So it's very sensationalized. So she was not aware, as far as we know. Again, we don't have any of her own thoughts, but as far as we know, she wasn't aware of this even potential past until meeting Reavis.
And did she speak Spanish?
That is a very hotly debated question at the trial. Not only did she speak Spanish, but how well did she speak Spanish? What was her accent like in Spanish? What kind of Spanish did she speak? Is this like high-class Spanish versus because we all know that languages exist in many different permutations, as you know, as a sociolinguist. And so they do these mental gymnastics. All the character witnesses that grew up with her say no, she didn't speak Spanish, she never spoke Spanish, never heard her say anything in Spanish. And then Reavis has this bit at the trial where he says not only, well, she wasn't able to speak Spanish as a child because she was alienated from her history, but then once she started learning Spanish, she spoke it with perfect, unaccented Spanish. As if there was sort of some innate natural ability to speak a language without an accent if you were actually part of that group. Right? So they're constantly talking about language and linguistic identity.
Thank you.
Some people might want to maybe be wondering where is James Addison Reavis today, and where is Sophia?
Well, they're both dead. Because
Well,
so
yeah. But they must be somewhere.
They're both in Colorado. Reavis, ever the con artist, so he ended up going to prison in Santa Fe. He wasn't there very long. He was charged with fine that he couldn't pay. When he came out, he was sort of a journalist. That was maybe always his passion, was storytelling. Used to nefarious ends, but he tried to get started sort of a tell-all kind of thing, and it never really went anywhere, so he is buried in a pauper's grave in Colorado. Sophia Peralta Reavis, also buried in a marked grave in Colorado, wanted nothing to do with him afterward. They had two sons, who there's lots of images of them in the archives, but they distanced themselves from their dad and this whole history kind of very intentionally, and so I don't include any photos of them in the book, and I don't even really talk about them, which is an ethical question also about, how much to get into or not get into those histories, but I thought there was enough to say just about the relationship between the two of them, and the other things I wanted to talk about, but they didn't super get into the sons, but needless to say, there are these amazing images of them in matching crimson velvet jumpsuits, and they brought them to play with royalty in Spain, and they were really a central part of the trial as well, in terms of the performance of like innocent, wealthy children.
Can you address Reavis' bilingualism, his skills of being able to maybe not speak Spanish, I don't know, but how could he have been able to convince others who may have spoken Spanish, be able to forge documents written in Spanish, maybe Spanish as it was spoken within the Arizona territory, or maybe Spanish as it was spoken by those from Spain? How skillful was he as a bilingual speaker or bilingual reader or someone who knew the language to be able to convince others that his documents were authentic?
So there are some holes in his biography, but we do know that he spent time in Latin America. And we do know that he had at least a cursory understanding of both Spanish as a language and the Spanish colonial heritage of the United States, right? Which he learned from various people. There were other people in his orbit. There were other people doing shady land things at this time. Now we think of the U.S.-Mexico border, and this land is very settled, but you have to remember that less than 50 years before he started his con, really 30 years before he started his con, the border shifted dramatically and everything changed. And you have people who are, people like William Walker and all kinds of people who are going to Latin America at this particular time and seeing, the border once it could move again. People are trying to buy Baja. Things are just kind of very slippery at this time, to the point that the U.S. government at one point offers to buy Reavis off. And he says no. Incredible.
Yes.
There is a Reavis ranch in the superstitions, and I'm wondering what the connection is to this Reavis. And also, I would like to know what the origin is of Mr. Reavis. Was he originally from a family that immigrated from Europe, or where?
He was from a family that immigrated from Europe. That's a great point to bring up. So he does have this whole branch of what he's talking about, that, I had this other understanding because my mother was an immigrant and that sort of thing. So that is a part of it. And the sort of layered history and the superstitions is informed by this and the stories that are happening, but also other stories that are happening at that particular time and since then.
Ma'am?
She answered my
Oh, okay. Someone else?
Also, I should have mentioned, because of the wire service at the time, a lot of the newspaper coverage was very broadly it was taken up in multiple locations. So this very much was not a regional kind of thing. It wasn't just of interest to people in the Southwest. This was a national dynamic. There was an audience for this nationally.
Unfortunately, one more. I was already right there, sir. Come on.
What were the legal repercussions to Sophia?
She didn't have legal repercussions. Only James and Reavis had legal repercussions. She had to file for divorce from him on grounds of non-support.
So I was going to say that Arizona has been in the spotlight positively for some time. Record heat for the summer. And by the way, next week should be the first days we're under 100 degrees.
Yeah, in 100 years.
What a thrill, it's like if I every day I whip you 100 times and then I cut it back to 90 times. Oh, that isn't so bad. So we're one of the few that can live in the 90s and say, yeah, that's pretty good. Another sort of black eye for Arizona. Would you agree with some that say that this whole Reavis land fraud was maybe one of the greatest almost pulled off land frauds in Arizona history?
Yes, depending on your view of certain other wars that happened. Yes.
Nothing black and white.
But certainly, yes, a huge swindle, and I think even more than the size of the grant itself is the quantity of people that he was able to trick with something that was so sloppy. So very sloppy. And this sort of ties into a very familiar narrative. Those of you, I don't know how many of you are actually from Arizona. I would venture to guess not a huge percentage, but it has been portrayed as a place where you can come and reinvent yourself, right? And you something happened to you in some other place, but you come to Arizona and you can start over, sort of from scratch, and you get a new chance at rewriting your own personal history. What James Reavis is doing is this kind of on steroids.
And second, probably the Reavis Land Grant, and that's maybe less well known, is the diamond scandal that took place up in northern Arizona, where an area was assaulted with bad diamonds, and one individual convinced big investors to invest what amount to millions in a non-existent diamond mine in Arizona. I don't know though a diamond's ever been discovered in Arizona. Although my wife lost her ring, and I was looking around and there it was. But that may be the only one. Any other questions? This is really a great presentation. I will explain in a minute why it's important to me. But I want to thank you for coming out and talking about this. This is a story that ought to be kept alive. And
For many reasons.
yes, the world is moving so fast that unless life and experience is about stories and lore. And unless we continue that, then they become forgotten parts of our history. So don't go away here. Before you go, we have this little for you. It probably won't bounce, but that's all right. Because we don't have enough members. Somebody would like to become a member. They can go out to the front desk and help compensate what we try to help people with. I was trying to find some illustration that would be representative of Reavis. And unfortunately, of all the influence that he had, there's very little visual documentation. There was Arizona. He built a mansion. There's a marker. That's it. but it was supposedly quite an elegant place. And there's just no visuals other than of Reavis himself. But I thought this might be appropriate because it's from the period. This is the Hackett House in Tempe, and it's done by Richard Nearing, who passed away a couple years ago, and was a phenomenal pen and ink artist. I really didn't like him. Well, for someone who doesn't draw a straight line, occasionally I just did this while sketching, and it didn't seem to help. He was still a tremendous artist. And so this may or may not have been in Tempe. It may never have been built, depending how Reavis came out. So let's give another big hand to Anita. So I just want to explain for those of you who may not be aware, I do have a twin brother, identical twin. He's 10 years older than I am. And he's not well liked in the family, so we had him removed, and he changed his name to Mark, so he would be associated with the family name. And he considers himself some sort of incredible historian. He conned the Republican to letting him write about 800 columns of Arizona history, which nobody has proved to be accurate. But nonetheless, he's very much in the same footsteps as James Addison Reavis. For example, he convinced the Arizona Humanities Council, which has a very good series of speakers on all sorts of subjects. And so he conned them into letting him do a presentation called the To Steal a Kingdom, the remarkable story of the most outrageous land fraud ever. And it kind of adds on to what Anita was explaining and gets into some of the earlier history. The focus is a little bit different, but it's all about Reavis and what he was able to do. So if you're interested in that, you might go to the Humanities website and see where he'll be telling these lies around the valley and the state of Arizona. I take no responsibility for what he does. All right. And I'm better looking. All right. So just to get caught up on a couple of seriously, we would love to have you become a member of the society. I think maybe on the back table or at the desk front. We have this form, and it is only $25, and it means a huge amount to the society to have as many members as we can. And now, of course, fall is upon us, and the museum is just filling up with activity. And these little flyers discuss everything that's coming up, and they're on the back table. The great thing about everything that happens at the museum is that it's free. Especially if you become a member, and then you come to the lunch talks, they'll let you free, and they'll let you into the museum free, even though you could sneak in anyway. So be sure and pick those up. There's a whole variety of entertainment and just lots of things. A new exhibit is coming up. Also in the month, coming Tempe owns historic homes. Four of if you don't know. Peterson House, the Hayden House, the Elias Rodriguez House, and the Eisendrath House. And they're generally not open to the public. But as part of the museum's activities, they do open occasionally in this form. It will tell you when you come visit those particular houses, each of which has an important story to tell. And also pick up the brochure for our lunch talk series next month. Many of you may remember Mark Vinson, who was the city architect for 121 years, and also the city's first preservation officer. And he'll be talking about a celebration of Tempe architecture. Mark is a terrific guy. So I think that is everything. No. You had your time. Sorry.
In addition, on the back table, you'll see some bookmarks from the bilingual press. In my hat as Associate Director of the Hispanic Research Center, we have a historic Chicano press that is part of the center, and we've just relaunched an online website. You can get our books from other unnamed retailers who give us much less money for those books. So the bookmark on the back says support your local booksellers. And order directly from us using the QR code.
Oh, you're here then. Your book, published in 2019. Is that still available?
You can buy the book easily from unnamed large online booksellers, or you can also buy it from Rutgers University Press. And anyone can reach out to me. Email here. I have a discount code that I could send you if you're interested in getting a hold of the book.
That's one if you're interested. There's only what would you say? Three really well-written books on the Reavis story. Scholarly books. And yours adds to that in a little bit different approach. Because the story is so complex that there's no one way to tell it. All right. One other thing I want to mention. The museum has been working for some time with Dr. Ben Furlong. You might remember he's published a few monographs in the past. But Ben took it upon himself to explore the history of a very unknown place here in Tempe, and it's called Pueblo de los Muertos. And the book has just been published. And it's the remarkable history of this particular area of Tempe. The area it doesn't exist anymore. It probably does underground somewhere. But there's no particular site. It's been built over. But Ben he did a lunch talk last year. But he'll be here on Thursday, September 19th, in this room at 5:30 to talk a bit about the book and how he dedicated 4 or 5 years of work to put this chronicle of knowledge together, and then he will be here to sign the book. So hopefully you can make it. Again, this flyer is available in the back. September 19th, 5:30 in this room. That's a Thursday afternoon. One other thing. She sits quietly in the back, in the corner. There's Brianna King. You can put your camera on yourself. No, you don't do that. But let's give her. She came to the museum with a whole different job. And when Dan Miller left, she was operating this very complicated system that allows us to record these lunch talks and stream them. And now she is a master of it. And we so appreciate the work she's doing because every month we're able to get this out. So thank you, Brianna. And that sums it up. Next month, hopefully we're well past 100-degree days. So we hope hope to see you. Let friends know if you enjoyed this talk. It is archived, so you'll be able to let people know that it's available online from the museum's Facebook page or our Facebook page. Thank you much. Take care. Have a good month.